Thank you. Thank you, Representative Elkins. Do you know that I really do appreciate your interest in standing up for small businesses?
Thank you, and I appreciate the work that you did on this.
Thank you. I started my little company in 1984, and I really appreciate being able to work and conduct business in an atmosphere absent oppressive government regulation. Now, yesterday, you represented yourself to this body as a struggling small businessman that was simply trying to protect your business from intrusive government interference, as you are today, right?
I don't know that I said I was a struggling small business. I said I was a small business owner.
But isn't it true that you have 12 very successful payday and title loan locations across this state and are, in fact, not running a small business, but are running a fairly substantial business enterprise?
Ms. Truitt, would you keep your discussion to the amendment, please?
I do have 12 locations, and I do not do title loans.
Your amendment strikes the enabling clause, does it not?
Yes, it does.
So there are some important components within this bill that your amendment eliminates, and so I'd like to ask you, isn't it true that the reason you've decided to gut or kill these bills is because, as the owner of these businesses, you are opposed to the state trying to impede the predatory lending practices and protect the good Texans who are falling prey to the industry's bad actors?
That's not true at all, Chairwoman Truitt.
Representative Elkins, didn't I come to see you early this session to let you know that I would be carrying these bills? And given the enthusiastic effort that you're putting into killing these bills, you've known about the effort to craft them. Mr. Speaker, I respectfully...
Representative Sheffield raised a point of order. The gentleman's time has expired. Point of order is well taken and sustained.
I respectfully request that his time be extended.
This is the first request for extension. The extension is granted.
Okay, go ahead.
And so you've known about the effort to craft these, Representative Elkins, because I came to see you early in the session about this. And yesterday you said you hadn't agreed to these bills, but isn't it true that you've been seeking ways, like with this amendment?
Would you please
keep
Mr. Truitt, would you please keep your questions to the amendment?
It's on the amendment. His amendment is to strike the enabling clause.
I understand the amendment. Please keep your questions to the amendment.
Which guts the bill.
It does gut the bill. I agree with that.
And that not once did you make any attempt to participate in the process that led up to these bills having agreement by the legitimate law-abiding players in the industry. And I'm not accusing you of not being a law-abiding, legitimate operator.
Let me give you my recollection of our meeting. We did have a meeting, and I appreciate you coming and talk to me. I told you that this was an industry that I was involved in, that I had a conflict of interest. I made that clear to you. I asked you, would you consider putting us under the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation? You had no interest in that. And I also informed you at that time I would not talk to you about this bill again. That's what my recollection of our meeting was, and I honored that until these bills now have got to the floor, and they are so now out of control.
And Mr. Elkins, didn't you tell me in your office that we simply did not need the legislation?
We do not need it. That's exactly what I'm arguing for, Ms. Truitt, is that we do not need this legislation.
Can you tell me, in your business, or in the business, not yours specifically, but isn't about 700% annual percentage rates typical in this type of business?
Yes, that would be an APR. But let me explain.
And what is the absolute highest annual percentage rate you know of from a credit card company?
Can I please answer the question? You know, that's a very good thing, APR. Let me tell the folks here about government math, and how about some real math? Do you know that if I loan you $100 and charge you $10 for a week, how many of you think that's 10%? You know what? In the real world, that's 10%. That's real math. But you know what? The government makes you disclose that as 520% APR because the federal government makes the assumption that the person is going to come back.
Mr. Elkins, can you tell me what
every week for 52 weeks?
What the highest rate of that you know of on a credit card?
I would think that most of them, the APR would be 720%, but you ask the interest rate is 10%.
I think on credit cards, it's the highest that I've ever heard of is somewhere between 27 and 30%.
Well, this is not a credit card transaction. These transactions are dealing with high credit risk individuals that the banks will deny, that the credit card companies will deny.
Some components of the bill and in the language you're striking. Keeping customers trapped in the cycle of debt occurs in part because lenders refuse to accept partial payment on the principal. Is that a customary practice in your stores?
I'm not aware of that. We accept any payment that the customer or the client would like to make. But look, this is not about my business.
Within my bills, would acceptance of partial payments be required within my bills?
They can enter into an agreement. You know, the wonderful thing about credit service organizations, they can do anything they want.
Are you opposed to that?
Because they're not regulated. You know, yesterday, the chairwoman talked about, you've seen these places everywhere.
Mr. Elkins, isn't refusing partial payment of a principal a key component of getting customers trapped in a cycle of debt? And isn't that one reason why you're so opposed to my bills?
Consumers are free to pay any amount of principal at any payment they want to at my locations. I cannot speak for what everybody in the industry does, but anybody can make any amount of principal from $5 on up on any payment they want to. But this is not about my business. This is about government regulation.
Mr. Elkins, your amendment strikes the enabling clause in my bill, and so isn't it true
this regulation
that you stand to add to your personal wealth considerably by killing these bills?
You know what? That is not about the bill.
Mr. Elkins, do you know the meaning of the term conflict of interest?
Keep the comments to the bill and not about my personal
Truitt,
business.
do you mind please keeping the comments
as I mentioned yesterday,
to the amendment?
Everybody in this body, Representative Taylor's in the insurance business. He just laid out an insurance bill. The attorneys tell us about attorneys. The doctors tell us about doctor issues. The title company guys tell us about title issues. And on this particular issue and this subject, I am probably as knowledgeable as anyone in this House on this particular subject. And I think the body needs to hear of the expertise. But let's talk about what this bill does. It's just not necessary, folks. We're already under the Texas Credit Act, Texas Finance Code Act. Chapter 393 is how we're registered now.
Mr. Elkins,
let me finish my answer here. The Texas Deceptive Trade Practices Act is another act that we comply with. The Texas Business and Commerce Code is another act that we have to comply with. The Texas Constitution is another one. The Texas Finance Code, Chapter 302. The Texas Business and Code, Chapter 9. Federal Truth in Lending. And oh, by the way, do you know what one violation, members, of a truth in lending disclosure is? It is a $5,000 up to $250,000 fine for one violation of truth in lending. So I can tell you we are not violating that ultimate federal law.
Mr.
Reg Z,
Mr. Elkins, would you yield to Mr. Truitt again?
We're also subject to the Texas Debt Collections Practices Act, Chapter 342. The Fair Debt Collection, the Federal Equal Credit Opportunity Act, the Federal Credit Bureau Reporting Act, the Federal Trade Commission. And oh, by the way, the Deceptive Trade Practices. And do you know what a violation, folks? Members, a violation today, under Chapter 392, under the existing regulation, the penalty for violating the Act is treble damages plus forfeiture of principal. Members, I just cannot see why this legislation could possibly be necessary unless it is the big institutions trying to squeeze the little guys. I'll answer questions.
Thank you.
You yield.
Thank you. Mr. Elkins, you are referencing all of the laws to which you must comply. Is the lender that you broker loans from an independent company as is currently required by law?
Yes, it is.
Why haven't you been
and they
willing?
charge the legal rate of 10%.
Why haven't you been willing to participate in this legislative process?
As I told you earlier, this industry, I have an interest in this business, and it was best for me to stay out. I did participate through different trade groups that I'm members of and received updates.
Mr. Elkins, do you know that I respect you greatly, and but I have to say I'm a little surprised that you would so blatantly defend or use your elected office to defend your personal business interests to the detriment of Texans.